Happy Friday night, y'all. I was thinking that maybe we would do a two for one on this Friday. Um, so this is episode 2, Buried Secrets, The Casket Girls, and Ursuline Convent. This is episode 2 of part 1 of the vampire series, my 4-part series that I got going on with some pretty cool, interesting little bits of information related to vampires and the Big Easy. So let's get right into it, shall we? First, I like to come with my little references here, and I want to show you guys this. This is La Beline, a ship that sailed in the port area of New Orleans in the 1700s. And here we have a little drawing of the Casket Girls as they arrive on ship in New Orleans. This image here is actually one of the little cassettes, little boxes that the girls were sent off with when they arrived in the New World in New Orleans. And as you can see, they were just basically a small little trunk, but they reminded people of caskets. And last but certainly not least, we have the Ursuline Convent. So we're going to go back just a little bit. In 1721, there were a group of women who were actually sent on the first wave of brides who headed to the New World, and they arrived in Biloxi, Mississippi in 1720. They were accompanied by 3 nuns in gray, and they had brought them over from a charity hospital in Paris. And it is said that this instance, along with the Filles du Roi of New France, is what inspired the governor of New Orleans, of Louisiana at the time, actually, which was Jean-Baptiste Le Moyne de Bienville. And he pled with the King of France to have them send over virtuous young women for the young men and the eligible bachelors in New Orleans to find suitable wives. So in 1728, the arrival of the Casket Girls began. The bustling port of New Orleans in 1728 came alive with the shouts of men, the clatter of hooves, and the scraping sound of cargo being unloaded from the ship. Among the arrivals were the first young girls from France, and quickly they were dubbed the Filles de la Cassette, or the Casket Girls, which is sometimes also called the Pelican Girls. With hope and apprehension, each young woman clutched a small wooden chest resembling a coffin, which held all of her meager belongings from her months-long trip. Of course, after months of being at sea, these women were full of apprehension and nervousness, arriving in a brand new place they had never been to before. And having been handpicked to be brides by the Bishop of Quebec and the French King's decree, these young women were deemed suitable of age and background in order to be presented for marriage, which was their entire sole purpose for being brought to La Louisiane. However, as they stepped off the ship, the women emerged from the dark hold into the harsh Louisiana climate, and these women were stark contrast to those who were already there. They had been in a dark cargo area, they had been on ships for months, they had not been in the sun, so naturally they were not the glowiest, and they were quite pallid in complexion. Having spent quite a bit of time at sea and confined in those cramped quarters like they were, they didn't have very much access to sunlight, and so they had kind of a sickly pallor that seemed to shock the onlookers upon their arrival. All of the men immediately balked at their appearance. With pale complexions that seemed almost translucent in the sunlight, the men described them as unsightly and even somewhat horrifying. Of course, after this, rumors began to swirl like wildfire, as they often do. These men, of course, were unaccustomed to seeing women look so sickly and pallid, and they began to gossip amongst themselves, asking questions like, is this an illness? Are these women weak or anemic? And some began to whisper even darker possibilities. Having been rejected by these men, these women were left with nowhere else to go, and clutching their casket-shaped chests to their bosoms. These women, who are now known as the filles à la Casket, the girls with the little boxes, were then sent to their new home. Under the care of the nuns at the Ursuline Convent, the women would reside there until they entered into one of their respective marriages. But in many cases, it was a broken dream for the filles à la Casket. Things turned far bleaker than anticipated, and the local men of the Vieux Carré didn't treat them very good. They weren't very respectful about their existence. Many of them were forced into unwanted arrangements and marriages, and a lot of times their husbands did not treat them the best. Others, who were unwed and alone, were forced into other types of occupations, such as SW work in some of the brothels and in Storyville. Of course, eventually all of this news got back to the King of France, and he was not pleased with what he was hearing at all. Dissatisfied, he demanded that the girls be returned to France, and in response, the Ursuline nuns took their casket-shaped chests and filled them with their remaining belongings, and then ascended to the 3rd floor of the Ursuline Convent at 1112 Rue Chartres, or Chartres. Some people say Charter. Prior to this, the 3rd floor had always remained like kind of untouched. It wasn't used a lot. But after that, it was totally sealed off, and until one fateful evening, the nuns decided to go up there, and they found the chests completely empty. Despite a thorough search, it seemed like all of the Casket girls' belongings had just vanished. And so now the nuns became fearful of the girls' nature, and they spared no expenses in securing that floor. In fact, they went so far as to bolt the doors shut, and the windows were secured with nails that were blessed by the Pope himself in order to keep whatever was on the 3rd floor sealed. And the whispers of the Casket girls being vampires began to fill the streets and the lore of the French Quarter. Later, there were renovations on the Ursuline Convent, and they produced a grisly discovery that's produced an enduring mystery of the legacy of vampires in New Orleans. The legend of the Casket girls is further entangled with more recent historical events. In the late 20th or early 21st century, depending on your chosen source, of course, renovations were ordered for the Ursuline Convent. During the construction, a horrifying discovery was made. The remains of infants were found within the walls of the 3rd floor of the Ursuline Convent. This discovery sent shivers down the spines of many. Of course, people began to speculate. Were these the remains of neglected or stillborn children, or was there something more sinister at play? The unanswered questions faced speculation and further blurred the lines between historical fact and chilling legend, which have now produced a convent that is shrouded in secrecy. In the wake of that discovery, the Ursuline Convent sealed off sections of the 3rd floor once again. While the convent continues to offer daily tours of its rich history, the sealed areas remain off limits to the public, fostering a sense of mystery and fueling the whispers of the past. So the legacy of the Casket girls transcends the realm of simple folklore. It's a tale of desperation, societal cruelty, resilience, and the enduring power of human imagination. The legend, fueled by whispers, misconceptions, and a recent historical discovery, continue to captivate, and terrify visitors to the Ursuline Convent, leaving them to grapple with the question, where does history end and myth begin?